Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Lee. I'm the Deputy Head of the School of Humanities and Languages. And as we gather here this afternoon to meet, I would like to acknowledge the Benegal people that are the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. And I would like to also pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. So on behalf of the School of Humanities and Languages and UNSW Australia, I'd like to welcome our panelists today. I'd also like to welcome you, the audience members, and to acknowledge and appreciate the work that my colleagues in interpreting and translation do to bring together events like this. This is a very special event for the school. It's one that we hope brings about positive outcomes for everyone concerned. So it is my, again, wish to welcome you here and wish that this is an extremely successful gathering.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our 6th Annual Symposium. As some of you will know, some of you have been to our previous symposia, we tried to have an interactive type of symposium where we have dialogues with different professions that work together. So last year we had the dialogue between lawyers and interpreting translation practitioners, and this year we decided to have a dialogue between the interpreting translation agencies and the practitioners. And the idea is not to have a fight, but to have a collaborative dialogue. Some of you are disappointed. And to see how we can move forward in this very unregulated, if you like, disjointed at times industry. So I think we've had about 30 years, if we start from the start of NATI, more than 30, 40 years. Almost. Yeah, almost, oh, yes, okay, almost 40 years. And also it will be 30 years next year. Of a lot of people working independently, individually, arguing against each other, not agreeing on things and so on. Now, as the president of OZIT, I have the same view that we need to work together collaboratively if we want to move on, if we want to improve, if we want to continue to become professionalized. So all of the stakeholders need to do this together. So I think it's time to put aside differences and look at the things that we share and the goals that we share and work together towards those goals. So let's see how we can better understand each other. We come from different views, and sometimes when we're in one spot, we can't see what the other side has to deal with. So I think we need mutual understanding in order to then try to work together better. So there are obstacles and limitations that surround us all in any of our roles. And so we may have great goals that we want to achieve, but there may be limitations that stop us from achieving those goals. So if we understand what those limitations are, maybe we can work together to try and remove those hurdles and to work together towards a goal. Obviously, there will be interests that we don't share with each other, but there will be common interests that we do share, and that's what we have to concentrate on. So today we have a panel of agency representatives and also of practitioners. And we have practitioners in the audience, and also we are streaming this live. So I don't know who is watching us at the minute, who is listening to us, but welcome to anybody who is listening and watching. And those of you who are on wherever you are watching us through the streaming, you are able to ask questions as well through the streaming. So we can get questions from them. So we will have questions from the audience and from the panel. And I give the floor now to Associate Professor Ludmila who will be the moderator, and she will be controlling the traffic.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you, our members of the panel, for coming here. Thank you, everyone who has come to listen to this discussion. Just to echo what Sandra said, there is a lot that unites all the participants in the interpreting and translation industry. And no matter what personal and professional interests are, I think we are all united by a shared desire to provide professional, high-quality service to those who need communication through interpreting. It is true there are different positions, but I think we are united in our desire to ensure that the training is, that the profession is staffed with people who are competent, who have excellent interpreting and translation skills, who have excellent professional ethics, who do not overstep the boundaries. On the other hand, this is also in the interests of the agencies who do want to provide the best possible service to the clients. So before we start the dialogue and shed the light on different perspectives that we might all have on this, I would like to introduce those who are going to participate in this panel, and I will then explain how the panel discussion will proceed. So I would like to start with Georgina Holder, who is the representative of the Australasian Association of Language Services. Companies. So Georgiana is there in red. Ari Papas. Ari Papas is the Executive Director of Marketing and Client Services of Encore, a private agency. Marie Gezelot is the Executive Manager of ATL, and those who have been on the market in the profession for a long time will better know of it as Gayungis. That's where I started working many years ago. Now, we have with us also the representatives of the public agencies. So George Visas represents Multicultural New South Wales. George is a relatively new director of the language services. So there's George. The healthcare interpreter service is represented by Gordana Vasic. Yeah. TIS International, TIS National. TIS National is represented here by Alison Thorne, who is the Manager of Interpreter and Language Policy Liaison. Now, we have several practitioners, and as Sandra said, there are practitioners also in the audience, so please feel free to participate after our panel members have spoken. Sean Cheng, a colleague and also a Chinese translator and interpreter. John Benson, French interpreter, court interpreter in particular. Kathy Wright, Auslan interpreter, and also Kathy will represent ASLIA. Amelia Limondi, our graduate and Indonesian interpreter, but also I think you are a PA representative. Now, PA Professionals Australia is represented by Matt Harris, who is the National Campaign Director. Ozit, Sandra Hale, whom you all know, who wears many hats, but right now she will be acting as the National President of Ozit, the Professional Association. And of course, last but not least, a very important person is Associate Professor Uldis Ozolins, who is the Director of Interpreting and Translation at the Western Sydney University. So he's sitting here at the front, and you will hear him towards the end of our discussion. So what I propose to do is, rather than our participants giving formal presentations, we'll lead this in the form of a Q&A. So there are certain topics that have been compiled by professionals, by the agencies, by my colleagues, and it is a good idea to start perhaps with a question of mutual expectations. The expectations that agencies have of practitioners. And later on, we will talk about the expectations that practitioners have of the agencies. And so to open this discussion about what you expect, you as an agency expect of your interpreters, I would like to invite George Visas, Multicultural New South Wales, perhaps to say a few words about your expectations. And I might pass the microphone.
Thank you. Well, I'm in a terrible situation where I'm losing my voice, but I'll speak slowly. I will make it through the entire session. Look, I am relatively new to the class. I reinforce what Ludmila said. I've been here only 5 or so months working in New South Wales as the new Director of Language Services, but I have had 6 years prior to that of being CEO of the Victorian Interpreting Translating Service. So whilst I am still learning to a certain extent some of the issues and some of the concerns that exist within the New South Wales industry, I have quite a long background in service provision, interpreting and translating. Can I thank Ludmila for the invitation today, because as a new person to New South Wales, I am really appreciative of the opportunity to begin to get some feedback. For those who are aware, Multicultural New South Wales was the former CRC, so Wales, and prior to that, I understand it's the Affairs Department of New South Wales Commission in New South Wales. So it's certainly been involved in the provision of language services for a considerable period of time. I was asked to provide some input or some information on what the expectations are from a public sector agency of our interpreters and translators. I suppose one of the first things I would say about a public sector agency is, given that it's part of government, most of what's expected by way of recruitment, by way of professional development, by way of performance, is pretty well documented within public sector guidelines. I'll start with recruitment. Recruitment to expectations of multicultural roles in terms of recruiting its interpreters and translators is that they all have a minimum highest possible available NADI accreditation. Would be the first thing there's an expectation of. As a government entity, the New South Wales state government entity, there's an expectation that they have citizenship or permanent residency or a valid work visa was the second thing that was expected. A biannual criminal record check is the third thing that is pretty important, because Multicultural New South Wales interpreters and translators do a lot of work in the legal and the police field. So that's fairly critical as well. Recruitment to Multicultural New South Wales is as a casual employee, so you are actually engaged as an employee of the state of New South Wales, and to be recruited as an interpreter to Multicultural New South Wales, there's an expectation as a public agency that you have to satisfy a merit-based selection process, which is matched against predetermined selection criteria. The selection criteria talk about a range of professional expectations in terms of interpreters and translators working for Multicultural New South Wales. I suppose the key for me is that Multicultural New South Wales and the government of New South Wales has its own language services code of ethics, which I've come across since moving here. I think it's a pretty strong mirror image of the often code of ethics, but expectation of working for Multicultural New South Wales is adherence to the code of ethics. Having said that, I think I wasn't sure how long to talk for, but the other thing I'd like to say is that Multicultural New South Wales hasn't done a great deal of recruitment in recent times. So that recruitment will recommence probably sometime in July. There'll be recruitment undertaken. The other area that probably is something that Multicultural New South Wales is keen to ramp up in terms of what it does is, first of all, it obviously expects its interpreters and translators to, it's fully committed to the NATI rehabilitation program and scheme, and it's very keen to support its interpreters and translators. It doesn't do, it needs to ramp up its professional development training, which we will begin to do fairly soon, Multicultural New South Wales. So there, I hope they're the sort of areas that you want me to cover in terms of expectations.
Thank you, George, but we don't pass the microphone on yet. I had a follow-up question. You mentioned NATI accreditation being a requirement. Now, I'm not going to talk about training at this stage here, but what about languages? Languages of asylum seekers, languages of newly arrived migrants, of certain languages that don't have NATI accreditation yet. What do you do in case when you cannot get an accredited interpreter for court?
Look, we struggle. I think, like most agencies, it's quite challenging to find people that have got some qualifications, some experience in that. Look, I understand from Nadi that recognition is increasingly available for pretty much all languages that Nadi covers, and that's certainly one avenue available to us. I'd like to see. Look, one of the things that I should say is that Multicultural New South Wales has a broader advocacy role, which aims to probably, and what we're hoping to do is actually identify where there are gaps in the provision and supply of interpreters, in harder to provide languages, certainly in the new and emerging communities. And I think Government of New South Wales has an obligation to provide support to develop and train more interpreters in the new and emerging languages. And I think the other way to approach that is to, and I come from Victoria, and it has been a successful collaboration in Victoria, but I think the collaboration in New South Wales between the Government of New South Wales, the private agencies, and the training institutions, like the University of New South Wales, where there may be some support and funding to develop or provide training and support to interpreters in the languages that we're finding challenging to actually get interpreters that are qualified. That would be some of my ideas for now.
Thank you very much, George. And we will return to the question of training as to a whole host of other questions. We just don't want to open them at this stage here. So, George, as you suggested to me, I'd like to invite Georgiana, who represents private agencies, to address the same question. What are the agency expectations of practitioners, and what are the expectations of skills, of professional skills, of ethics, of competencies?
I think for a private agency who's running a business, and I can only speak on the behalf of the ALC members, the Australasian Association of Language Companies, but availability is one of the big expectations, because the agency has a client waiting to have a service delivered, whether it's interpreting or translation. And if for interpreting, they have a booking system, and the interpreter is constantly not available, then it's likely that agency won't keep contacting, or that interpreter won't be up near the top of the list. The same with translation. There's an expectation on the client's part that their translation will be done in a timely manner. So I think availability is a really important expectation of practitioners, that they're available through text messages and emails easily. Another expectation in terms of what you mentioned in terms of knowledge and skills is honesty about capability and productivity. So in terms of translation, if the agency asks you about your skill in a particular area and your knowledge of the vocabulary of a particular type of translation, say it's a scientific translation, and you're not honest about your capability, then that's very difficult for the agency and for their clients. So, and also in terms of productivity, about how many words you can translate in a day or in a week or a month. They're depending on you to have an idea of your productivity, so that if it's a large team they're assembling together for a large translation, that the deadline in a month or two is going to be met. And same for interpreting. So if you're working in legal or medical interpreting, which are the large areas for interpreting, that you have the training in the vocabulary for that particular type of interpreting, but also in the protocols that go along with that. For example, in the court interpreting, that you know how a legal interpreter is meant to behave in terms of their being a dispassionate member of the team, so that you're not developing too close a rapport with either party. Confidentiality is obviously a high expectation that you would abide by the Ozit Code of Ethics and keep all the information that's become available to you confidential, and you may have with your agency signed a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement, or maybe for a particular situation. So there might be a particular translation client who has specific confidentiality requirements. You may not even be able to view the document to give an idea of whether you're capable of doing it or how productive you can be without having signed a confidentiality agreement. And then, of course, punctuality. So as an interpreter, it's very important that you come prepared, you've read or researched whatever is necessary for that particular assignment, and that you're there before the required time, and that as a translator, you meet the required deadline. So I think there's some of the main expectations of agency.
Thank you, Georgiana. And what's interesting is that you've really focused on the ethical aspects of the interpreter's behaviour, all of which are in accordance with the Ozit Code of Ethics. So if I could now here ask for a voice from a different side, although perhaps we will hear not a dissimilar approach. And so I'd like to ask John Benson, who, as I said, is a French English interpreter, to hear what your expectations of agencies are, John.
I thought about this, because Ludmila did tell me that she might move in this direction during the conversation. Quite a lot last night, and fundamentally, whether it be a government agency or a private agency, given the disastrous state of the industry from our point of view as interpreters, it's a terrible situation. We're not just underpaid, we make the teachers and the nurses and the policemen, who are all asking for 6% pay rises, but we make, them look as though they're well paid. So given that situation, what we need you to be for us, we need you to be our champions in the marketplace. As I understand the agency model, we are the people who have an extraordinary skill, an absolutely extraordinary skill, what we offer. And it's essential, although the problem being that there's extraordinary ignorance of our specialties. And when we do our job well, it's completely transparent. And we as interpreters run into this all the time, even with extremely educated people, judges in the federal court, they don't understand what it is we do. Given that, we need you with your agency, we need you to get out there and tell people just what we are offering and secure for us massively greater fees. And I say that you may laugh, but really massively greater fees than the fees that are currently offered. For example, I'll get back to the points that Georgiana raised. Look, they're all perfectly reasonable expectations to interpret. They do their research. For example, for a court appointment. But why would you do that if an agency rings you and offers you $240 to do it for a day? Why would you bother? Of course, there's a vicious circle. Which comes first, the professionalisation or the higher rates of pay? But in response to that, I would say in the marketplace there are very, very well-experienced, well-qualified interpreters out there who are offered ridiculous sums of money on a regular basis. Now, to move forward for a positive, excellent future for us all, and this is where I make this point of being champions for us. I have, by complete analogy, I have a friend who works in the entertainment industry as an agent. And he works in a not dissimilar area. He has a voiceover agency. He makes an enormous amount of money for it. And a bit like a translation agency, he has a stable, a cohort of about 150 actors who provide voiceovers for actors. And what they provide is extraordinarily skilled language services. He rents that at a huge rate. And obviously, the advertising industry has a lot more money flowing around than we do. However, what interests me is the way he promotes these voiceover artists. The principals, the people that he's an agent for, and which he then takes, I think he takes 15%. And on really high billing people, he takes 10%, people over $1 million, something like that. But he really promotes them on his website. He's got a beautiful little bio of every single one of his artists. He's got extracts of all the wonderful voices and answers they can do. That if you're a prospective ad agency or on that, you can see exactly what they'll do. And you also you understand what special skill that they're offering. So fundamentally, that is my response is. If you really want to get all these, and at the same time also got the academic and the accreditation side of the industry, trying to professionalize it, to raise the barriers for interpreters to join the industry. But then we've got Professionals Australia, for example, who put out a fantastic report that shows that not only are there a great number of interpreters, myself included, we're thinking, look, why do I even bother? I think I might just leave. But why would young people want to spend, I don't know, what does a degree cost? 30,000? 30,000? Why would you do it? If you're going to end up being offered $250 to go work in court for a day, and it's extremely stressful, it requires an incredible level of skill, and it can come back to bite you afterwards. Suddenly you get a subpoena to appear later on, because the first thing that, as we know, barristers do is they go to the interpreters.
Thank you, John. And again, I'm not trying to get away from the question of remuneration and how agencies can support practitioners. We are going to talk about it. But just in an interim, and since you've mentioned the question of viability of the interpreter's hardship, financial and professional hardship, but I'd like to move to discuss the next question, which is about agencies and practitioners' needs and whether they meet or whether they are different. And so I wanted to give the floor first to Marie, who is a new agent, and tell us a little bit about your experience about working in an agency and the issues of viability that you have encountered so far.
Hi. Yes, we are the third generation of associated translators and linguists running this company. And what we have found is that I'm not sure we are enemies between interpreters and agencies, but it's important for interpreters to understand that the major clients, they come to agencies because they don't want to have several interpreters to call, so they ask us to do the job for them, to search the interpreter and to provide the interpreters. And what you have to understand is sometimes if you don't attend or if the interpreter is running late, we have as agency to pay for that. I had several bills for doctors, for example, because the interpreter did not attend. And so the client, which is the insurance company, asked me to pay the bill of the doctor, $1,700. And you have that regularly because it happens sometimes. I'm not saying that the interpreter is not running, is not attended by his fault. It can happen, but the consequence, you have to understand that there are consequences first. But what is important for me, for you to understand, is that you are the agency. When you go to an assignment, you represent yourself because you're independent in one hand, but you're working for the agency on the other hand. And when you go to an assignment on the name of the agency, you represent this agency. So if you, most of you, you do very well the job, you're on time, you do it, you respect the code of ethics, and okay, 95% of jobs are well done. And if you do that, it means that the clients, they are happy and they will come back. And if they come back to us, we are able to provide you with new jobs. So it's win-win. That's my concern and my point of view of the interpreters. We don't treat the interpreter, we don't treat the interpreters as, you know, oh, they are just doing the job and we keep the money. It's not that, because you can think so, but when every month I have to call and explain the interpreters, they have an expiry date because their certification is expired. Or when I write to them to say, in months, you won't be accredited anymore. Some of them, they don't care about that. So that's also our job, to help the interpreter to keep the level, to keep the accreditation, to be on the side. So that's our expectation, is interpreters to, of course, do well the job, represent well the company, because it's win-win, and as much as the interpreters will do that, will be able to provide the job, because the insurance company or the major clients, they won't come to you as independent one by one. So it's better to work for me all together, because you can get jobs by yourself as independent, but you also need, if you want to work a lot, we have some interpreters working full-time for us in some languages. They work full-time because they are always available. I told you, it's very important. They are helpful sometimes for assignments out of business hours. That's important, because some interpreters, they don't want to go too early, they don't want to go too late, they don't want to go on the weekend, but the clients need the service. So if we can do that all together, I think we can maybe do something for you.
Thank you, Marie. Just before I ask Amelia to follow up on this, because Amelia is in a really interesting position. She's a practitioner, but she also started a sort of a company of her own. But I just want to throw a question that initially came from John also. How much do agencies believe freelance translators and interpreters need to earn per hour in order to make a decent living? So we won't necessarily address this question right now. So I'd like to ask, but we'll think about it. And I'd like Amelia to perhaps tell us whether your perspective as a practitioner has changed at all when you also started employing other practitioners. Is there a sense of a conflict within you as an agent and as a practitioner?
And also as a PA member as well. So feel like I'm in every boat at the same time. So it is very interesting. I definitely can hear the opinions from both sides. And I only recently just started out hiring other interpreters and translators. So I'm nowhere near as big as any of the agencies on my right. But that's really been over the last 6 months. So much more understanding what's going on both sides. So I think just I have a lot of notes here, so tell me when to be quiet. But I think, so first of all, what I can see is, so agencies are just companies, businesses, and the main idea of a company is financial gains, I would say, profitable. So I don't think it's wrong for an agency to give a sort of amount to interpreters or translators, although ethics does come into that. Because in terms of free marketplace, you can charge whatever you like. It's up to the interpreter or translator whether they say yes to a job. But on an ethical scale, you as an agent, you as a company, do you feel ethically comfortable with the rate that you are paying your interpreters or translators? That's another question. So I think for myself, just with the experience that I've had, and also especially being a PA member as well, is I don't want to hand out jobs to my interpreters or translators that I myself wouldn't want to do. So of course I need to make a margin with the overheads, with the with the networking, with the organizing the client, everything. You need to make that money as well as the agent. But at the same time, you need to raise enough. You need to be negotiating well enough to be able to get the rates that your interpreters or translators deserve. And for me personally, I think ethically, I think as someone providing language services, I need to provide the best. So my little motto is that every client I work for, I want them to experience the best services I've ever had for language services. And to be honest, you know, I do get really amazing comments from my clients, and I'm really happy to hear that, like, that they get fantastic interpreting, fantastic translation services, and not only that, but with the technical aspects, with the equipment, with the everything, the admin, the communication that we've had with them. That's what I want to experience every single time. Of course, I'm small, it's easier to do it when you're small as well, but once you get bigger, of course, you need to hire more staff, and it's going to get more messy in that. So I think there's a few comments. So just going on earlier, I'm actually really happy to be following on from Marie, because Marie actually contacted me last year to understand more about Ozolins, and so she actually wanted to meet up with a number of us from Ozolins to be able to talk more, and I think that was really fantastic, just to be able to break down those barriers as well, those boundaries, and just to say we are here in it together, what can we do to help the profession and those sort of things. So earlier I think Marie said it'll be a win-win situation. You know, you'll get, we can provide full-time work for some of our people that we're employing and all that, and you'll have continued work and all that. I think just the only thing that didn't sit quite right with me there is just the payment levels. I think the payment levels are not enough to make it a win-win situation for the interpreter. But on that note, I also just want to talk to the interpreters and translators and say, if you're not happy with the pay you're receiving, then say no to the job. Because if I have interpreters and translators that say no to me, then obviously I need to either find an interpreter or a translator that's going to be less qualified and do a worse job, which is going to look worse to the client anyway, and I won't be satisfied. Or I need to come back to the client and say, oh look, actually I can't actually do this job for you unless, you know, you raise it 100, 200, whatever more, so then I can actually provide the quality service that you need, otherwise I can't do the job. So really, this is where I think PA really stands well in this place. For the interpreters and translators, you need to come together, have the one voice and say, no, we're not going to do it because this standard, we need to be up here. And then I think, actually I'll be going into more remuneration stuff later on, but I might just hold it there for the moment.
Thank you. So are there any other opinions about how much agencies believe freelance should be earning per hour to make a decent living? Anyone?
I'll make some comments. Not necessarily on that question, but it would reflect.
So Ari asked.
Yeah. Well, look, I think from the language service provider's point of view, the only asset we have are the interpreters and translators. And any service provider that does not embrace that, they're in their own business. Then they become what I call a ticket agency, or those agencies that you buy tickets from online to go and see the next rugby league game. So therefore, I think ownership of the asset we recognize to be the interpreter and translator has to be appreciated, and the appreciation comes with a relationship which needs to be defined against Australian Fair Work Australia situations. The questions we need to ask, why is it that it is not regulated? And I think the answer is somewhere between the purchaser of the services, which is government in most cases, and the supplier group, the interpreters, together with this other major stakeholder, the language service providers, and define the market. Now, most of our business, at least for the company I work, are won via procurement processes, in other words, tenders. It gets on, we need to put a submission, and in that submission, we would put a rate, which is a market rate, not necessarily defined by us, expected by the government, historically, which come as a result of budgets, the state or Commonwealth, they put in place in budget cycles. So there's a historical perspective we need to undo. And then we pay the interpreter against the profit margin and overheads, which any company would have as an ethical behavior. Otherwise, we will go belly up and therefore we won't be able to survive. Now, it is called supply and demand. The work that PA has done over the years, there has to be a logic as to what is the value on an hourly rate of an interpreter who has professional credentials, and not necessarily, when I say professional credentials which will demonstrate consistent behavior, performance, linguistic and otherwise, against the code of conduct. In other words, what everybody has said so far. And as a result of that, then if there is a minimum wage, which all service providers need to adhere to, then they will play the market and they will put a rate above what is the minimum, which is currently not available in our industry, and it's historical. And the reason the industry was deregulated, again, government deregulated this industry consciously in most states, with the exception of one service in this state. And we have this anomaly where not only there are variations within languages, there's a variation between spoken languages and the sign language. There's a variation between field-specific areas, health versus justice versus police, etc., etc. And there are variations across states. On-call has national contracts, and we really cannot come up to a uniform national rate which will be respected by interpreters, accepted by the consumer, government, and win the business. There are many yellow pages providers who tend to compete in a very unethical manner because the consumer always wants to get the cheapest. So therefore, I think I agree with everything that is being said. You're worth a lot of money. You need to understand what your value is, come to a mechanism like Professionals Australia and demand. That would put the cat amongst the pigeons. We will be put in a position to meet baseline requirements, pay minimum wages, whether there are casuals or not, and then compete for the dollar value over and above that. That will bring sanity to the only industry which lacks regulation in that level. So it's an industrial relations question. And we are not adhering to industrial relations legislation in this country. All of us. You do not. We play the same game along the same lines to survive. And certainly government may be, and I know this is being taped, may be in breach of minimum wage requirements. I'm not sure.
Mari, just to illustrate what you have just addressed, I'd like you to see the statistics that were provided to us earlier by Professionals Australia, here represented by Matt. And it tells us about the aging profession of interpreting and translation. It tells us also about the earning. And as one other member of BA asked, what are agencies doing to address this situation? Well, Alison, TIS National, and then I would ask Matt to address this.
Yes, I'm Alison Thorne from TIS National, and Ari has raised something that is a critical point, and the point is price sensitivities. And one of the things that we are constantly doing at TIS National is convincing clients that they need to be using a professionally accredited interpreter, and that, you know, just like using a bilingual person or a family member is not adequate. And there's a balance there. And for some clients, if they feel the price is getting too high, that's what it is that they will opt for. So one of the creative things that we are working to try to do at TIS National is actually to be reducing the administrative costs of actually providing the service. So introducing things like our TIS Online system has delivered efficiencies. We're going to be introducing later this year, expanding our automated telephone interpreting service from 18 languages to 50 languages. And as a result of bringing technology into the industry, one of the things that we were able to do at the start of this financial year was we held prices stable for clients, no price increases for clients, but we put the remuneration for interpreters up in line with the Consumer Price Index in order to be able to pass on some of the things that have been delivered from technology. You know, and that's one of the things where we can be working towards a win-win, because if clients are simply saying, we can't afford this service, we're going to use family members, it's professional interpreters that end up losing.
If you could pass the microphone to Matt. Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks. Yeah, I've just got a few observations. I think it's been a really interesting conversation so far, and I think the practitioners here have articulated the problems really well. But I also won't lay the problems in the industry on the, I guess, on the doorstep of the agencies either. I think that perhaps a better question here is, what is the government doing to address this situation? Because the government is, of course, the biggest purchaser of language services, and I really think that this is a problem that needs to be put on the doorstep of decision makers, both at a federal and a state level. And I guess I'll make a few observations, I guess, about the industry and how we see things. It's very much similar to what Ari's just put to the group. But there really is a fracturing and diversity of procurement methods, which mean that labour in the language services sector is used very inefficiently. And there's really no, from our position, real incentive for private sector investment in continuing professional development and those sorts of things, because where there's no incentive really for agencies to go it alone and to provide professional development or to provide better rates, because they're going to be undercut by, as Ari put it, these groups that you might be able to find in the yellow pages. There's a real unhealthy competition on price and not quality, and I think really the competition should be around quality and not price. We want to see a structure that maximises service quality and the long-term sustainability of the sector, and that's something we've got to, sure, we've got to work with agencies on that, we've got to work with practitioners on that, but we need to talk to government about the best way to resolve that. Now, Professionals Australia doesn't have a firm position on what that solution looks like, but we think that really it needs to be a government led solution with the industry players, with unions, with agencies, and with the government departments that purchase language services. So I think they're the observations that I would make at this stage.
And that, just to follow this up, I remember having a similar conversation with your colleagues a few years ago, and I remember hearing a very similar promising plan of action, because PA has a structure and it has the facilities to move this agenda forward. So could you explain why this has not happened yet and what you are planning to do in the next future? Now, I'm not trying to get away from the question of what are agencies doing to address this question, but I'm still curious for us all to hear what PA can realistically do, what it has done already, and what the next steps are.
Well, I can only speak to a few areas of our work. The first thing I would say to answer that question is that change is really tough, and it takes a fight from not just PA, but the practitioners under the PA umbrella, and that sort of change is tough and difficult, and it takes time. In Victoria, I guess, is where we've had the most movement, if I can put it that way. And I know that the discussion's being videotaped, so I don't want to get into too much detail about discussions that we've had with the Victorian government about these issues. But we've created a voice for practitioners in Victoria. And one of the reasons I was very keen to come up to New South Wales was to hear firsthand, particularly from practitioners, about your experiences in the industry and how we can take things forward in this state. But I guess I can answer that question, say discussions are ongoing with government.
Thank you. So I know, Kathy, that I haven't asked you to think about this question, but what always strikes me is that Auslan interpreters have achieved a lot more than the interpreting profession of spoken migrant languages. And Kathy, perhaps, and I've got another microphone here, so perhaps you could tell us what happened, can you trace back a little bit the history of Auslan interpreters who work in, at least it seems to us, in much better conditions. They interpret simultaneously, they work in teams, they are paid at the rate of conference interpreters. So what happened? What led to Auslan interpreters being so far ahead in terms of remuneration, education, and so forth?
Thank you for asking me to respond to that question. Sorry, I hope this microphone's okay. A little bit closer. I think with Auslan interpreting, we came from a model that started off as social workers who actually played the role of social worker and interpreter. And at a point in time, we realised that this was not a good model to follow. We needed to have interpreters that were not, influencing the deaf person in a particular way or advising them. It was very unethical to do that. And at that point in time, the number of Auslan interpreters came together and formed ASLIA, or a sign language interpreter group of professionals, and worked very hard to have Auslan to be one of the accredited languages of humanity. And so it's from that history that we've fought strong and hard, and I think that we do work together a lot more. So we have a lot of peer review, and certainly we encourage sign language interpreters to be mentored by other sign language interpreters, professional sign language interpreters. And I think that we have a very strong kind of community focus. I'm not sure about the spoken language interpreters, but I have a feeling that the Auslan, the sign language interpreters, we know each other. We know if any of our members are not very ethical. and so, we support and encourage and offer lots of professional development through ASLIA as well. One thing that does disappoint me, just going back to working conditions, is that it is so disparate. I've worked for some of the agencies here, some of the government agencies, and it's very disappointing to find that, a cancellation fee, I guess any of us that have a regular job wouldn't want to be told, oh, by the way, don't come to work tomorrow, we're not paying you. I held the day for you, no, we can't pay you. And I think this is a difficult issue for our government service providers who are always trying to squeeze out the best of taxpayers' dollars. I do understand that's difficult, but again, it seems to be at odds with, interpreters and translators. They say, oh, how valuable we are and how professional we are and how learned we are and how hard we work, but we're not going to pay you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Very interesting. Insightful. And George, did you want to address this?
Well, I just wanted to address one of the questions you asked in relation to what the agencies can do. And I suppose one of the things what's in the best interest of the agency is the sustainability of the industry. And the agencies wouldn't exist if we didn't have qualified interpreters and translators. The sustainability of the industry will be very much linked to the level of remuneration and conditions. And I think one of the things, and again, I come from Victoria, and I suppose I'll use that as an example, but one of the things that the agencies in Victoria have done is actually work reasonably closely with Professionals Australia, and also advocate to government about things like there being some sort of standard, some floor in terms of some level at which interpreters should be paid. I know that the Professionals Australia have used the Multicultural New South Wales Award for interpreters and translators as a bit of a guide in terms of what what might be known. I see that's just as a guide. But I suppose to answer your question, one of the things the agencies can do, and I can say have done, is advocate to government about the fact to increasingly value interpreters and translators, but also look at the sort of solutions that Professionals Australia are talking about, and see them as solutions to maintain the sustainability of the industry. That's some of the things they can do, and I'm aware have been doing with government, who, as Ara points out correctly, some of the probably the number one purchaser of interpreting and translating.
And George, are you, as a director of interpreting and languages at the Multicultural New South Wales, are you concerned about the budget? Are you concerned about the possible cuts and the repercussions for the salaries, as opposed to, an aspirational approach?
Look, I suppose I put on a different hat now as Director of Language Services of South Wales, rather than that of where I worked in Victoria. I suppose one of the things that stands apart from Multicultural New South Wales is that there is a remuneration framework in place in terms of the Crown Award. That remuneration framework has to be funded in terms of New South Wales government, in terms of provision of services. So in terms of whether I'm concerned about budget, I'm not sure I'm concerned about budget, but I'm always concerned if there's going to be cuts in terms of budget to language services. But from the Multicultural New South Wales perspective, what we pay our interpreters and translators is clearly articulated in a Crown Award, and that's what we're guided by. And I think it's an award that is one of the better financial frameworks for interpreters and translators.
Yeah, it's something. It's topic. I think the challenge that we had in the previous discussion between spoken languages and Ozolins, one is driven by legislation, the Disability Act. It is a disability to be deaf. It is an incompetency not to be able to speak English. And I guess when we have policies of encouragement in the various state jurisdictions and Commonwealth jurisdictions, where it is not mandatory to go ahead with an interview without an interpreter, unlike the Ozolins situation where it is mandatory to have an interpreter, we have a difference of appreciation at starting point. Governments will never legislate for spoken languages, and the reason they have given, I've been doing this for 35 years, so I have failed to see an improvement over the years. The reason being is once you commit yourself to a legislative requirement that you must have an interpreter at critical stages of a session, you need to drive your policy that the language barrier is with the provider of the service, not the recipient of the service. Policies must be written to make mandatory that the doctor, the lawyer, the police officer who does not speak Eskimo needs an interpreter of Eskimo competencies to be able to communicate effectively. It's a human rights issue, to communicate effectively with the Eskimo consumer. If we do it the other way around, and the poor bugger who doesn't speak adequate English, then it becomes a welfare model, and this is the community model that we have, and therefore, 35 years later, I've seen not an evolution of the industry, but a negative spiral to the both remuneration as well as appreciation. We have seen an exodus of very well qualified interpreters over the years. Since NATI was introduced in the late 70s, that's when I started, we had 28,000, maybe by now 31,000 practitioners, both for interpreting and translation accredited, a lot of them overseas. But the company I work for, we only have 4,500 practitioners, of which 15 to 20% of those are unaccredited practitioners in those languages that NATI cannot test. And recognition is not necessarily the most attractive solution for quality assurance. It is a band-aid approach to meet government policies to meet the demographics. So I think I'm making statements here. the interpreters were earning in Victoria in 1980, $89 per occasion of service for 3 hours minimum hiring period, similar to the hourly rate that in today's value for money that George's service has. What they've done is they've halved it to an hour and a half. There is so many anomalies. In Victoria, the interpreter gets hired for an hour and a half. We may talk great things about Victoria, but you know, the interpreters in Victoria are paid less than the interpreters in New South Wales. So they're in a much better position than what our interpreters are in Victoria. And we charge a reflection of what we pay. Unlike the sign language, where they get hired for 2 hours because they're driven by an award. So the answer to all of these is government legislation driven by the industry, the cohorts of interpreters. The greatest enemy that you have are not the agencies, are yourselves. I'm sorry to provoke you like this, because I'm an ex-practitioner and I used to be a trade unionist for many, many years. The greatest problem are the interpreters themselves who are not showing the same solidarity, the same professional dignity that our colleagues have in ESLIA, and both competencies as well as the ability to exercise their right to request additional money.
Thank you, Ari. Mari wanted to add.
Yes, I just would like you to think about the situation if the government in Australia or in New South Wales, let's say, would fix a fees rate for interpreting. I come from Europe, and I was in Europe not so far away. And believe me, when you have a government starting telling how much you have to pay, you become poor year after year. I expect that never the state of New South Wales or the federal government will fix the rate of your remuneration. You can choose your wage. If you go to internet, as my colleague said, you will find interpreters who announce a rate the half less than the rate that we pay interpreter. And on the top of that, we also pay the super for the interpreter. So the rate the interpreter receives is not only that, because what you don't see is that we also pay the 9.5%. And it's not deducted on your payslip. If one day a government put the finger in that, you will become poor year after year. I've seen that in Europe. Each time the public sector try to organize something, the situation is worse than when we try to organize ourselves. Believe me, I'm quite new in the country. You have been living here for a long time. You don't know how you are lucky to live in such a country. If you go to Europe, you will see what is the situation of the population, of the workers, when it's fixed by the politician, the deputy, and everything by law. You have more and more and more obligations, less and less and less money. Also, as my colleague said, is that the first client using interpreting services is the public sector. How can you imagine that they will pay you more? They are the first client. Their interest is to pay less. So the first thing you have to remember is that your first competitors are the other interpreters. You're not in competition with agencies. We are the provider of work for you. And the work we get, you won't have it by yourself. Because you don't have any big insurance company. Oh, that's the two. You have the government, but you also have the power of the insurance company. Do you think that they will accept to pay more? They want to pay less and less. So you have to remember that the first competitors of the interpreters are the interpreters themselves. Your best friend are the agencies. We have to work together. That's my opinion. Maybe you don't share it, but we have to work together and to protect the profession together. But if you want the agencies help you, you have also to be careful. And it's better to try to control the exercise of the, I don't know if you say so in English, the right to be interpreter, the control of your skills and abilities to do the profession. That's the best. Just for me, the last thing that we are the best guarantee for the interpreters. I hope you will think so at the end of the day.
Thank you, Marie. And you raised a question that I don't know how many of us share, that the interpreters actually need the agencies, that they couldn't do it by themselves. And immediately I'm thinking of the number of I&T interpreters that got away from the model of relying on agencies. So I can see that Evelyn, please pass. So Evelyn Hilaire, a French interpreter, wants to speak.
Thank you for the various comments, and thank you to I for clarifying why ASIA is getting better results than OSIT, the professional associations. Why that's happened, because there is law behind this Disability Act. That's always been the case. However, the point I wanted to come back to is the point about interpreters are their worst enemies, which is the summary of what we've heard a few times. The fact is, interpreters have been pushed and pushed and pushed into becoming contractors. And as contractors, they're not allowed to pollute and push the rates up. So we know Professionals Australia has managed to get the ACCC authorization. However, it's not easy. It's just a very first step in a long road. And so those interpreters have to stand on their own and get whatever rate they can get. And then we've got the case with Multicultural New South Wales, where there is an award and there is a union behind, the Public Service Union, but they completely ignore interpreters. I recently sent them 2 emails. I didn't even get an acknowledgement of receipt. So if you have any issue, who do you turn to? We have been cornered. So it's one thing to say, yeah, interpreters are not doing enough, but people like John and myself, we've been pushing the rates we asked for. That's why we basically don't work for the agencies.
I guess the question, may I, through the chair, the question has been targeted at my comment about the interpreters as their worst enemy. No, I welcome that. I welcome that question. I think it can, within context, it has good intentions, my comment. In other words, it's provocative to get the interpreters to unite and create consistency in professionalism, because I think one needs to demonstrate professionalism first before they can expect to be paid professional rates. And we know for a fact that we do not have consistency across languages, and there are reasons for it. But you made a comment about independent contractors, and I disagree with you. The company I work for, we have, as I told you, 4,500 practitioners on our books, and 99% of those are casual employees. They've got casual employment contracts. They're not independent contractors. I think some of us tried to discuss in between lines the overheads that the language service providers have. First of all, an interpreter who works for us is an employee. We need to apply to Fair Work Australia conditions. There are cancellation policies that need to withstand external scrutiny. The hourly rate is negotiated, and in a contractual environment, the employee or the prospective employee has the right to reject. There is no enterprise bargaining agreement because there is no group of people to sit across the table to discuss. Who do you go to? If you do not get an answer from Mario or George, you go to your union. And that's what is the norm in a democratic industrial relations environment that we operate. I think, I'm not here to profess unionism, but I think we need to understand that there are rules and regulations which govern relationships. The second thing, we pay professional indemnity. Because you're an employee, we have ownership of your professional skills and your professional and the customer's dissatisfaction in case you do not perform against their expectations and to your professional, not yourself, but to one's, I better watch with my terminology, one's professional conduct. So as a result of that, language service providers need to adhere to certain rules, and we do, based on the relationship we have. If you're an independent contractor by choice, as many translators are, then you run your own company, and you should know of the complexity of the environment we all operate.
Thank you, Annie. I will pause this course of discussion for a little while because you also, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, and it was quality assurance, which echoes our discussion about professionalism and so forth. So I'm sure that we'll return to the remuneration and the rights and so on. And of course, after this particular set of questions, I'd like also to discuss working conditions, preparations, briefing, and so on. So the question is about how agencies ensure quality and competence. And clearly, ensuring quality and competence starts at the beginning. It starts from the recruitment practices, from the provision of induction and orientation, if it exists. It's about providing a career path for new graduates, and of course monitoring and quality assurance. So I understand, Alison, that TIS National has been working in this direction more than in the past. So perhaps you could share that with us.
Yes, thank you very much. TIS National is very, very committed to the issue of quality and competence. Like I imagine most of the other agencies here, our allocation policies are always to allocate the highest accredited teacher that are available, and that's something very, very important. But I would like to just talk a little bit about some of the more innovative things that we are doing. People may or may not be aware that TIS National operates a mystery shopping quality assurance program. And that is something that is very, very important that we can talk to our clients about. We mystery shop 120 calls per month. How the mystery shopping program works, a bilingual mystery shopper calls up, the calls are taped, and then they're actually assessed by NAATI examiners. And we get very, very useful information about patterns and trends we get information about ethics, about accuracy, and but what we do with that information, we use that information to work with our panel to actually provide real feedback. So I lead a team of interpreter liaison officers, some of them who are NAATI accredited interpreters themselves, and we've been investing a lot in professional development for our interpreter liaison officers. So my team tries to get out to all the sorts of professional development activities that you would go to that attract PD points, so that when we are having coaching conversations with our interpreters about what's been found from the mystery shopping program, that we're all on the same page about what it is that a professional interpreter does, what it is that's expected. So like that is one of our programs that we're really, really proud of. Another program that we're very proud of is a document that's actually called our Service Quality Framework. And most agencies, well, all agencies would accept feedback from clients. The question then is, when feedback comes in, what's actually done with that feedback? And one of the things that we do is we investigate the feedback, and we do not start with the assumption that the client is necessarily going to be correct in their complaint, because sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't understand what it is that a professional interpreter does. So we get in there, we investigate, we have procedural fairness, we hear from the client, we hear from the practitioner, and we have coaching conversations around that feedback as well. We're extremely committed to quality, and if over a period of time there's persistent negative feedback about a particular interpreter, and that interpreter is not open and reflective and wanting to change their practice based on that feedback, there are things that we can do to performance manage interpreters, and if allegations are contested, and these are very, very rare cases, but I do have at my service external investigators who can investigate and make recommendations. So our service quality framework is about quality and it's about procedural fairness. And I think the last thing that I want to mention in terms of our commitment to quality, I have a very significant budget that my team manages for sponsorships and scholarships. And every interpreter who regularly does work for TIS National is eligible to apply to be reimbursed for a professional development activity annually. And that is because we highly, highly value professional development activities that attract PD points. And we think it's important that we invest in those things and we invest in interpreters. Our program also covers interpreters who upgrade their credentials from paraprofessional to professional, that they're able to claim back for their NAATI testing fees. So, you know, that's just a few of the things I'll mention.
Thank you, Alison. And I am particularly interested in the issue of professional development, especially in the absence of mandatory pre-employment training. But before I ask Gordana to speak on that, Sean Cheng, our colleague, Chinese interpreter.
Thank you, Alison. I think it's a very interesting
It's not on.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Alison. I think it's a very interesting mechanism in terms of quality assurance and quality check. But from a trainer perspective, I think what I'm interested in, I would like to ask all the agencies, in regards to interpreters, I get asked a lot of time by my students after they graduated to ask, how can I find an interpreting job? And what are the agencies looking for? Of course, I know the ethical aspect, like being on time, being professional, being competent, but what exactly are the things that you're looking for particular field? For example, if it's a legal courtroom interpreting, do you have more specific skill sets that you actually sort of clarify and say you have to understand, for example, how the legal system work or how a lawyer's consultation work? Do you have this kind of basic knowledge about this law or that law and things like that? That gives the potential candidate a very clear idea what are the exact skill sets they need to acquire before they can even actually ask you, can I be your interpreter? Can I be your interpreter? And also, I think from a career path point of view, I think translation and interpreting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry global-wise. And I always tell my students, say, you should not just look at the industry as just being an interpreter or just being a translator. You can even become like an agency or project manager for a service provider, a language company. So if they want to get into TIS National, for example, not to work as an interpreter, but to work as part of your team, will you prefer to hire translation interpreting graduates than other kind of candidates? And if I can say that if we equipped current students, current new graduates, with knowledge about technology that you're using, is that a preference? Will they develop a career path to become an important member of your team to help you refine that technology, refine that workflow, help you to develop a more efficient way of working and communication and coordination and management in the future? So this is something that from a trainer point of view that I'm actually interested in. I know we talked a lot about the remuneration, payments and everything, but I want to come back to this essential skill sets, because it's the skill sets that make us interpreters and translators or language professional special. And we have to, when it comes down to the value, the core value of our profession, it's all comes down to what you can do and how you understand the whole industry works, how you understand the trends of that industry and what is happening and what sorts of new skill sets that you need to acquire to actually catch up with the trend, not to say, okay, everything is changing, I'm now complaining about lots of different factors. I just want to make a comment like this. I'll just say from a trainer point of view, is there have you, like agencies, if you're the leader in the agencies, have you looked into this aspect, right? The student not necessarily become an interpreter or a translator, or maybe they probably can become a part of your team. And will that make a positive impact to the issues that we are discussing now in the near future?
And I would just add to that, because I think we should also look not only at our current practices, but also at what we aspire to and what we can realistically change in the immediate future. So in addition to what Sean said about employing qualified graduates in promising positions with career paths where they fulfill more than one set of skills, but is there a form of encouragement, reward, remuneration, support that can realistically be developed in the foreseeable future? I don't think it is productive for us to say, do you reward? Do you give priority to trained interpreters? Because we know what the answer is. But what I think is important to know from the perspective of professionalization of interpreting, especially if we are talking about professional rates that we aspire to, what can the agencies realistically do in future to encourage trained graduates to support their career paths, to reward them for excellence? Anyone? Go down.
I can talk about the question that you also asked, Alison, and then I'll get to this point. So first of all, to address the question related to quality assurance and competencies. I'm here on behalf of 5 healthcare interpreter services that operate under the umbrella of New South Wales Health. We are a very unique agency because we are government funded. As Ari was saying, nowhere else in Australia there is a policy in place which mandates use of professional healthcare interpreters, but we do have one in New South Wales Health. So all healthcare providers in public health facilities must use professional healthcare interpreters. So that's a difference of our agency in relation to other agencies here and across Australia. In terms of quality, it starts with merit-based recruitment. So when we recruit our interpreters, we have a full panel of 3 panel members, plus a person who speaks the same language, who is also an accredited level 3, another level 3 interpreter. So our interview process also includes a role play. It's a dialogue role play. So that's how we recruit our staff interpreters. So I should say that as I said, there are 5 healthcare interpreter services in New South Wales. So for you who are potential interpreters who wish to look for employment with the government, you can contact any of us. You can go to the Ministry of Health website and just look for interpreter services. You will find details of all 5 services there. There are 3 metropolitan and 2 rural services. The metropolitan, I come from Western Sydney, Western Sydney Local Health District. There is another service in Sydney and one more in Liverpool, which is southwest, and there is also, excuse me, there is also one in Illawarra and Hunter, New England. So you can approach any of these services for employment opportunities. We are the only agency that actually employs permanent staff interpreters. So among 5 of us, we have just over 220 staff interpreters who work for either full-time or part-time, but we also rely on large panels of what we call sessional or contract interpreters who work for us when there is a demand. We provide services in 130 languages. When we recruit interpreters, we provide basic orientation. Basic orientation is applicable to both staff and sessional interpreters. What it means, it's a mandatory 2-day training where our professional development coordinator delivers training on skills and techniques of interpreting on knowledge code of ethics, and everything one needs to know before embarking on interpreting in health for the first time. So this is mandatory. So this applies to interpreters who are NATI accredited and also those who are not NATI accredited. As we know, we have 130 languages and not all of them are tested by NATI. So for those who are don't hold NATI accreditation, we have to put it through this basic orientation for 2 days and give them some basic skills before they go out and interpret in health settings. When it comes to induction, every time a staff interpreter gets recruited, they go through the basic orientation and then they spend a couple of days of being inducted by their relevant manager into all the processes relevant to health. We have 2-hour induction for our sessional interpreters, which is done by the coordinator of sessional interpreters. What's most important to know about interpreters in health that they are all required to do medical terminology. So that's a paramount. And in the past, we were asking them to do it themselves. But what we are doing now, we are actually organizing that internally through our learning and development at a very reasonable rate, and we actually pay our learning and development to deliver that training, which is a blended model, partially classroom-based and partially online. So that's a prerequisite for them to work in health. When it comes to professional development, we have a professional development committee, which consists of farm managers of healthcare interpreter services in New South Wales, plus a professional development coordinator. And we actually have 50 different workshops which are specific for interpreting in health. One of them is the basic orientation that I mentioned, but all others are extremely specific. They are interpreting in specialist healthcare area, they are addressing speech pathology, they are talking about ethics or advanced interpreting, note-taking, phone interpreting, etc., etc. I have an extensive list here in front of me, but if you wish to talk to me after the session, I'm happy to point you in the right direction so where you can find all the trainings that are available. All trainings attract 90 points. And they are all available to interpreters free of charge, provided that you are registered on one of our panels. If you are staff or if you are registered on our panel, training will be available for you for free. So in terms of quality assurance, what we do in helping interpreter services, we are doing on-the-job observation of our staff interpreters, where an accredited assessor was an observed person on the job. We also do a telephone survey, similar to your mysterious shopper. And we are, but in health, it's really hard to reach very busy clinicians to stay a couple of minutes of their time. So we are considering having a survey monkey to reach them via email. The other mechanism that we have in place, we encourage our users to provide feedback about our services, about all aspects of our service from our call centers to our interpreters. And we actually take every feedback very seriously. So if the feedback is related to underperformance, related to the breach of code of ethics or lack of competencies, we address it individually. And then if there is a training gap, then the interpreter is referred to further training in a specialist area where they underperform. So
we might pause here because and thank you for that. I'm mindful of the time. I'd like to hear some answers to Sean's earlier question about how we can move forward. Perhaps we could combine it with another question, which is probably of crucial importance to every interpreter. And it is a question of preparation and briefing. So we agree that interpreting accurately and completely requires preparation and briefing. However, it hasn't been done yet, and it is very difficult to achieve. So again, in addition to the question of how agencies can reward training, excellence, encourage career prospects for interpreters, what can agencies also do for interpreters to ensure that preparation materials and briefing are provided, especially in such technical fields as legal, court interpreting, and law? I wonder, George, is there anything that Multicultural New South Wales could realistically do in this respect?
Look, I think there is. They don't currently do it, and I hope that there is something they can do. Look, it comes down to the, I suppose it comes down to the ability to provide the time for appropriate briefing and the necessary resources provided to enable them to be best prepared or better prepared for the court environment. Now, that brings with it some costs, obviously, and look, all I can really say at this stage is something that I'm certainly keen to look at because multiple class has a significant amount of work in the court environment. I think it's an ideal approach to take where there is appropriate preparation and briefing time before you go to court and some preliminary and some documentation prior to the court case. But it would require working collaboratively with the users of our service, the clients of our service, or in the courts as well. And it's certainly something I'd like to take on board, Ludmila, in terms of looking into the future. I'm pretty confident that it's not happening at the moment, and it's something particularly in more technical areas that should happen. It is happening in some areas. I was certainly aware of Victoria in some areas that it did happen, but it's something that certainly will happen. That's really the best answer I can give you at the moment. I would like to respond a little bit to the comment that Stephen made. Sure. I suppose there's a couple of things there. I mentioned earlier that Multicultural New South Wales is about to recruit additional interpreters. I know, I'm not sure whether you were referring to it earlier with this, that we know what's happening or what's not happening. But similarly to the health interpreting service, and just to a certain extent, we have a set of key selection criteria that newly employees need to meet. And even the Multicultural New South Wales has a particularly strong legal portfolio in terms of the work it does. It's my expectation that when we release selection criteria for engagement of interpreters with Multicultural New South Wales, that some degree of higher learning in a relevant area would be part of those selection criteria. And I think that is something. Now, again, it's a competitive merit-based selection process, but I would expect that those selection criteria should address the sort of skills we require to undertake the specialist work that we undertake. And given we have such a large legal portfolio, my view would be that when those selection criteria are released, they will have within them, notwithstanding some of the government limitations, bureaucratic limitations, but they would have within them some expectation that they have some higher learning in a field that they'll be working in. That's one half of the question. Now, the second part of the question would be about recruiting people to work at agencies to do work other than interpreting and translating. I use this as a free plug here. Okay, New South Wales is currently recruiting, and we are recruiting people at manager level within the organisation, and there are some that will be working in the management, recruitment, and professional development of interpreters. So I just put out there to look out in recruitment websites for the government of New South Wales over the next month or so, positions that are going to come available. I think it makes sense that you may recruit people that have some experience within the industry, whether that means that they're practicing practitioners or people that have worked in the area of educating or developing practitioners. But I think there is obviously some synergy between people who have worked in the industry and being able to work within an agency and add value to the agency. So I'll just quickly throw that one in terms of recruitment.
Thank you. I know that Gordana asked for the floor, but I just wonder whether we should also give the audience the opportunity to ask any questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good one. David Deacon. One of my various hats down in Victoria is that I'm chair of RMIT Program Advisory Committee, and something I just became aware of it, in fact, at our last meeting on Monday from one of the agencies, and it goes beyond what has been talked about with professional qualities, ethics, and that sort of thing. And they were mentioning that it was more a case of people who were, if you like, personally disorganised, or had poor time management and that sort of thing. So, chaotic lifestyles, I suppose you might say. The problem was that not so much that they weren't professional when they were working, it was more they weren't professional in the way that they actually dealt with the agencies they worked with, and they couldn't be relied on to, if you sent them an email, they couldn't be relied on to reply to it, and so on. I'm just interested to hear from any of the agencies whether you've noticed that that's a problem. In other words, not so much their technical skills as a linguist or their ethics when they're actually working, but just their general personal organisation, whether you've noticed that that's a problem.
I can respond to that very quickly,
Yeah.
if you like. Historically,
Yeah, if you could pass.
historically, my voice is loud, so historically, I think that's perhaps a challenge. But that's the least of our concerns. Our concerns are more about consistency in some of the behaviors which have nothing to do with linguistic competency, like punctuality, etc., 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 than responding to our emails. Yeah.
I was only using that as an example, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and the other agency, we are often, on the same, we work with some same clients, we work, of course, we have a lot of interpreters working for the two agencies too. So I think I can also maybe give a point of view. What you have to, it's important for you to understand that we have to invest as an agency to improve the service we provide to our clients. We also have maybe to invest to help to improve the service or to improve the quality of the service we provide to these clients. The problem is that if the interpreters are casual employees of our agencies, they also work on their own. Amelia, I remember when I arrived in the company, you were working much more than you do now, because now she developed, I'm happy for you, and it's wonderful, and we talked about this, but and it's not an issue, and everything is fine. But what I mean is that your request is, how can we do to invest in the interpreters in somehow for the training or maybe to employ them? But this investment, because of the status, it's complicated because it's an investment for the other one. We have to be realistic. Which agency will invest money in the training or in employing an interpreter? That's a question we have, because we have several languages that we could employ interpreters full time and use them, 5 days a week. But if we do that, how is our interest?
Thank you for your point, Marie. Sandra wanted to respond, and then John.
Thanks. Just as the Ozolins president, I think the solution is in what I said at the beginning, that we need to work together.
Yeah.
You can't start to think, okay, who's going to pay the 10 cents that belongs to me, the percentage of that and the other. If all of the agencies work together, then you could all put in a fund to train the interpreters that you all have resort to. So then everybody will win from that situation. So I think that's the only way ahead. You can't go the other way. The only way is to work together, to everybody contribute. And I'd like to say that I have been trying to raise the awareness of this, that quality costs money. Now, we can't get away from that. Quality costs money. Costs money to the interpreters. Some interpreters out there don't want to put any money into becoming trained and professional. And we have difficulty convincing interpreters that they need to train. Well, that is not a very professional age. So it costs money to interpreters, it costs money to the agencies that hire the interpreters, it costs money to the end users, to the service providers. Everybody needs to realize that. And so it will, again, if we'll work together, then we'll be able to do it, because we'll all be willing to put in the money that it takes to receive a much higher return. And I think that's the only answer, really.
I think this is particularly the case considering that the majority of interpreters works for just about every single agency. It's a small industry, and there is no such a thing as a monopoly on a group of interpreters' jobs.
No, Sandra's very succinct.
Yeah. Now, it is 6:20 and we have 10 minutes for our discussion with Ms. Ozolins to wrap up. But before he does so, I thought, my personal feelings are that perhaps if we achieved something today, it is more of an understanding of the perspectives of both the practitioners and of the agencies. It may not be entirely new to us, but these are the things that are important to articulate, realizing what keeps us back from moving forward. Uldis, over to you.
Okay, thank you. 10 minutes to wrap up what is a huge area. Let me start with the central problem. Profits and losses for agencies and profits and losses for practitioners. Now, agencies, let me take the agencies first. Agencies are not rich. Some are government controlled, and profit might mean much to them, but it affects them. But agencies make minuscule profits. They're not rich. Some practitioners might think they are. They're not rich. And if you have to chase 6 interpreters and call them up on their telephone, mobile phones, and so on, and that's problematic, then they actually get microscopic profits. And if then the job has been returned 48 hours before and you're not paid for it all, then you get nanoscopic profits. That word will catch on. And then if something else goes wrong and the interpreter doesn't turn up, then you make a deficit. Now, of course, it's entirely different for the interpreters. The interpreters make minuscule profits. But if you're juggling things and you're not online to get the latest translation job, or you're running between jobs, then you get microscopic profits. And if there are 3 jobs, but they're all on at the same time, and you can't possibly do them all, and you make nanoscopic profits. And if you're an interpreter and you get a parking ticket, then now, there are patients of practitioners. We ran through them, and it was interesting to sort of hear what they are. Every agency wants the highest level of accreditation. George wants the interpreters and translators. That's very valuable. Merit-based selection was mentioned, but in fact the driving thing is availability. And availability is absolutely critical, both in accredited languages and in unaccredited languages, and how do you secure that availability. The code of ethics, yes, agencies care about that. Some have more quality controls than others. They're concerned about confidentiality and so on. They know that and that's an increasingly difficult environment for agencies to work in. There's a commitment to revalidation, and I think the revalidation system, while not perfect, is actually driving some visible change in the area. A very important point was to be honest about capabilities. This is something that's not, and it's the other side of what Sean said. Well, you know, do you ask about skills and so on? You know, it seems that both sides need to ask about the skills of each other. Productivity is obviously important. Field-specific knowledge and protocols, knowing what happens when you turn up for speech therapy. Consequences for agencies of poor performance. So sometimes those consequences can be monetary for poor performance. And of course, the poor performance of one practitioner affects perceptions of how other practitioners are seen. So you get this situation where it's not just that you're behaving well, if somebody else has behaved poorly before you, that's a problem, even down to the level of technique. Why are you doing that? The previous interpreter didn't do that. Well, the previous interpreter sort of took them to the taxi stand. Why didn't you? But great comment. I really like it. Only asset is the practitioners. Okay, from the practitioner expectations, I think that's a very good macro point, you know, to be champions. I think that's very, very important. We'll come back to that. Secure massively greater things, also small things, but some hopefully massively greater things. How to promote the field and its special skills. There are tender processes, how you actually get into those tender processes and so on and try to influence them is very important. I think that issue of remuneration, what's reasonable and ethical, when there, in many cases there has been actually a decline in remuneration rather than an increase, not in every case, but in some cases. And the issue of preparation and briefing, agencies feel they're the victims themselves because their clients don't give them the information that there can be demands made there. And this question of how agencies invest in the practitioner is very important. Now, for practitioners, who is a client? The first client of a practitioner is the agency. If an agency hires you, you're not going to be paid by Westmead Hospital, you're going to be paid by the agency. So the agency is your first client, and do you, this issue, very importantly, the practitioners represent the agency. A very nice point I thought was the jobs that you would be happy to take yourself. Okay. It's sort of, I think it's a very nice ethical question that balances agencies and practitioners. Would you take the job yourself? Some practitioners treat the agency poorly, not just not responding to emails, but all sorts of things, abusing the agency and so on. We've had too many incidents like that, or simply not knowing, or never actually working out what the hell the agency does. Consistency is an issue. Or one of the elephants in the room, there's many elephants in the room, is government your first client. And in this field where we're very dependent on government, that's a vital question. Okay, the big questions that came up, and they really are big questions, and they're not necessarily new, but I think there were some nice suggestions. What is the market? How do you find the market? How do you see what's in the market, and the price sensitivities? This thing of convincing clients that Alison mentioned, that you know, you need to convince people that yes, you need an interpreter, and the family won't do, is incredibly important. There are, I think, some successes on that line. I think it's coming not necessarily from the field, but from horrible things like risk management and so on, which are becoming more prevalent. Unhealthy competition on price, not quality, was mentioned from the yellow pages. I didn't know that anyone read the yellow pages. You know, I mean, I remember what they were.
They're online.
It's online. Oh, it's online now. It's online. This question about some form of remuneration that came up a lot. Murray's point about the government gets involved in the European case. Yes, in Europe with the rather antique system of sworn interpreters or sworn translators, and where governments set a fee, the fees are 10 years out of date. But the industrial relations situation in Australia is very different, much more flexible and much more, there's many more levers that can be pressed there. So I don't think that's a fair question. The same with mandatory requirements. So mandatory requirements that governments should impose, and it raises this whole role of government. The question of casualisation and the double face. Casual people can demand their own fees. Many interpreters and translators never demand their own fees. They're fee takers rather than fee demanders. And I think casualisation has got into a two-edged sword here. And then the question came up, well, should agencies work together? For example, there are many quality issues perhaps that agencies could work together on. And I mentioned some of the quality questions that came up. This issue of reducing administrative costs and using technology. There's more technology now in translation management, translation project management and so on, where use of technology, you can then increase remuneration and therefore increase sustainability. I think that's a very important look. I like the mystery shopping and the feedback that comes from that, and the service quality framework. What do you do with complaints? One of the issues that I think is really serious about the field is that many of the users and interpreters and translators don't complain because they think there's no point, because you'll only get the same thing next time. And that becomes a vicious circle, and it's something to get out of. I think many agencies support PD activities. Some of them are able to incorporate it into their working practice. Others support it, and it can be criteria for giving people more work. I thought it was a terrific question from Sean about recruitment and do you know the skills of the practitioners? What do you ask them, apart from the formal things about your accreditation and so on, you know, and your tax file number or whatever it is, or your ABN. One thing I throw this, Sean mentioned that it skated over. He said he didn't really want to address it, but it's very good. And to save you listening to the next hour lecture from Sandra Hale, this question as to whether training is recognised in an agency database. You've got a database. Does it recognise training? Does it? Yeah, it's fine. We've been at it for 20 years. Some agencies recognise it. Many don't. Whinging and complaints. It's interesting. However you write whinging in Word, you get a red line under it. You probably not. It's a real problem. Okay. There's got to be effective complaints. I mentioned complaints of users, but also complaints by practitioners. Why has Ozolins got to where it is? Okay, it's the factors that Kate mentioned, but it's other factors too. Ozolins interpreters they're not a minority, or in the vernacular, they're not norms. They've got a right to be there. They've got a right to demand industrially, professionally, whatever they want. That's it. And they know there's struggles and you've got to overcome things, but they feel perfectly entitled to do so. I think we're still stuck in an area where many interpreters and translators, spoken and written languages, don't feel they're entitled to anything. And it's a problem. In professional association, Professionals Australia and so on, and its ability, TIS has made improvements itself, but some have also been pushed by Professionals Australia, and that's very important. And the ending questions really are practitioners their own worst enemy. There are common issues. Who is you? Who is us? We still haven't worked that out. So we're still getting questions of you and us, and it needs to be common. In the metals industry, there's a metal industry body, there's a metals industry association of all the big metal owners, capitalists, tycoons and so on. And there's a metal industry trade union, and they're tough buggers too. They fight like hell. But when they come together in an industry body, they speak in one voice. What does the metal industry need? What has to be done? we need an industry body too, and while we're all fighting each other, I think this has to come, and that's about as far as I got. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Uldis. Excellent as always. Uldis is fantastic at summing things up. Before we conclude, we would like to thank all our presenters with little tokens of our appreciation. And George, thank you, Georgiana, John Benson, Amelia, Kathy, Gordana, Marie,
It's not getting.
Alison, Ari, yeah. George, you didn't get it, yeah, and Matt, of course. I know that Matt has to run and catch a plane, and who is already Sandra, Sean, thank you so much for organizing this symposium with Joyce's help and the help of a whole lot of other people. Thank you everyone for coming, for being here. Sorry that we didn't get more participation from the audience, but we will have time to chat a little bit, and I understand that there is a reception outside, and we will be able to mingle and just continue these important conversations. So thank you very much, the panel, and thank you, the audience. Thank you.